Hello, my name's Gemma, and what I'm about to tell you still doesn't feel real, even after everything's been said and done. My stepmother smiled as she cut my hair, like she'd been waiting years to do it. My stepsister, she yanked off my scarf in front of the whole town, laughed like I was a joke. Then came the whispers, whispers that I was cursed, dangerous, unstable. They locked me in my own room, and while I watched from a window, she stood on that festival stage and read the words I wrote. And the worst part? My own father stood beside them and said, "I have to look out for my daughter." But he wasn't talking about me. Why did my family want me erased so badly? And how far did they go before I finally fought back? I always thought the sound of scissors wasn't supposed to make you flinch, but when they're moving toward your head with purpose, without your permission, they make a sound that slices deeper than hair. That morning, Ashbury was quiet. One of those slow-breathing South Carolina days, with the sky stuck between winter's gray and spring's promise. In our old Victorian house, the walls always held their breath before something cruel happened, and I'd learned to read the silence like scripture. I was halfway through washing the breakfast dishes, still in my faded library staff t-shirt, when Valora walked in behind me. She didn't say hello, she never did. Her perfume hit first, some powdery rose scent that always reminded me of a funeral home. She set her coffee mug down just a little too hard on the counter and said in that syrupy, blade-sharp tone she used for pretending to be civil, "You're not really planning to go on stage looking like that, are you?" I turned, towel in hand, brow already raised. "Looking like what?" She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Hair like that, so long, so unkempt. You're not a child anymore, Gemma. People will talk." I didn't answer, because I knew the real reason she was wound so tight. 2 days from now, at the Founders' Day Festival, I was supposed to read one of Mama's favorite poems at the opening ceremony. Reverend Thomas himself had asked. And Valora wanted that spotlight for Sable, her daughter, the golden girl. I dried the last dish, turned my back to her, and kept my jaw tight. She moved closer. I felt the shift in air before I saw the flash of silver. "Just hold still," she said, like she was brushing lint off my shoulder. Then I heard it, the first snip. I whipped around, heart hammering. "What are you—" She grabbed a fistful of my hair and sliced again. "Stop!" I shrieked, stumbling backward. But she wasn't even looking at me. Her eyes were on the strands falling to the tile like dead petals, calm, methodical, like she was weeding a garden. From the corner of my eye, I saw Randall in the doorway, just standing there. One hand in his pocket, the other cradling his morning coffee. Watching. Valora let the scissors dangle by her side and said flatly, "Now you won't steal the spotlight from my daughter." My hands were trembling. My voice stuck behind my tongue. I didn't cry. Not then. I just backed out of the room, fists clenched, the cold tips of my sheared hair brushing against my neck like a bruise. Upstairs, I locked my bedroom door and didn't turn the light on. I stood in front of the mirror, just breathing. The cut wasn't even— it was vicious, ugly. The same hair Mama used to braid for me every night. Gone. I remembered her fingers, gentle and sure, threading through my strands while telling me stories about women who rose, even when the world tried to bury them. Valora had no right to touch what wasn't hers. No right to erase that part of me. I found a soft scarf at the back of my drawer, one Mama had given me when I got my first library job. I tied it tightly around my head, tucked in the ends, and stared at myself again. Different, but not broken. Later that afternoon, I forced myself to walk into town. The Saturday market was alive as ever. Colorful produce stalls, baked goods lined up like soldiers, people smiling over coffee cups and flower arrangements. I walked past them with my head high, even as I felt their eyes dragging across me. At the honey stand, Mrs. Carter greeted me with a tight-lipped smile that didn't match her usual warmth. That's when I knew. The news had already traveled. Or maybe it was just the scarf. Maybe they sensed weakness. People in Ashbury could smell shame the way bloodhounds smell fear. That's when I saw her, Sable. She was radiant as always, in her pastel dress and flawless hair, fluttering around like she owned the whole sidewalk. She spotted me before I could duck away. "Jemmy!" she called out sweetly, her voice loud enough for half the market to hear. I turned, already bracing. She stepped forward, smile locked in place. "Oh, that scarf is cute. Mind if I see what's underneath?" Before I could answer, before I could even move, she yanked. It came off in one quick jerk, and so did my breath. Gasps, then the hush, then the sound of someone snickering behind a tomato crate. I stood frozen. The wind bit at my exposed neck. My chopped hair stuck out in jagged layers, uneven and raw. I looked like I'd been through a storm. Sable tilted her head, mock surprise painted across her face. "Oh, I thought you were just wearing it for style." I didn't say a word. Didn't run, didn't flinch. I reached down, picked up the scarf with steady fingers, and tied it back on without breaking eye contact. Then I walked away, not fast, not slow, just steady. People parted to let me through. Some pretended to look at other things. Others didn't even bother to hide their smirks. I made it all the way home without shedding a tear, but once I was inside, once I closed the front door and leaned against it, my knees went soft. I let myself sit on the hardwood floor for a few minutes. Let the silence settle. They weren't just trying to embarrass me. They were trying to erase me. I went upstairs and opened my mother's old notebook. Inside was the poem I was supposed to read at the festival, The Quiet Route. It was about growth in darkness, about beauty no one saw until it broke the ground. I copied one line onto a scrap of paper and pinned it to my mirror. They buried me, but they didn't know I was a seed. If they thought this would break me, they were wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. The weight of what happened at the market clung to me like smoke in my clothes, impossible to shake off. I thought if I could just make it through Sunday, things would settle. That by Monday, people would find something else to whisper about. I was wrong. By sunrise, the first whispers had turned into full sentences, and by the time I left the house for work, the town already had a new story. One with me at the center, wrapped in shadows I hadn't earned. As I walked along Main Street toward the library, I could feel it. Something had shifted. The usual greetings were there, technically, but they were colder, clipped at the edges. No small talk. No, "How's your dad?" from Mrs. Evers. Just a series of tight nods and glances that didn't last longer than they had to. I passed Keller's bakery and caught a glimpse of Sable standing just outside with Mrs. Keller herself. They leaned in close like co-conspirators, speaking in tones too low for me to catch, but not so low that I couldn't feel the weight of it. Sable caught my eye and gave me a smile. One of those fake, slow ones that made you feel like you'd walked into a trap and only realized too late. When I finally reached the library, the space felt off. Carla, one of our regulars, lingered longer than usual at the checkout desk, her hands twitchy, her voice uneven. "I was just wondering," she said, not meeting my gaze. "Were you up by the old oak tree Thursday night? Someone said they saw you doing something." I blinked. "Doing what?" Carla hesitated. "Muttering, like chanting, that kind of thing." I laughed, short, flat. "No, I wasn't. And even if I had been, I promise I wasn't calling down the plague." She laughed too, but hers was nervous, as if she suddenly realized she shouldn't be standing so close to me. The conversation didn't last long. She left with her book tucked close like a shield, and I was left staring at the stamp on the inside cover, wondering when common sense became a luxury in Ashbury. I spent most of the day going through my normal routine, reshelving, organizing the new arrivals, helping a few students with their assignments. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that people were watching me through a different lens, like everything I said or did had to be run through some sinister filter before they could understand it. That night, just as I was settling into a quiet dinner alone, my phone buzzed. It was Thalia. Her message was short. "Check the community page. Now." I opened the Facebook group, Ashbury Connect, and there it was. A post from an anonymous account, a photo of one of my sketchbook pages. The symbols, delicate, looping patterns I'd drawn for a local history project on early Appalachian folklore, looked strange out of context. Paired with the caption, they looked dangerous. What is this? Is someone bringing bad luck to Ashbury? My chest tightened. I scrolled through the comments. Isn't that the librarian girl? I heard she was caught talking to herself near the churchyard. This is why our crops are failing. I always knew she was strange. There were a few voices defending me, people reminding others that Ashbury had always dealt with seasonal blight, that folklore wasn't witchcraft, but they were buried under layers of suspicion and fear. The image had come from my private sketchbook, a book I kept in my desk drawer, one that only one other person had ever touched. Sable. A few weeks ago, she had asked to borrow it, to help her with a floral design she was sketching for Valora's shop window. I hadn't thought twice about it. She returned it with a smile and a compliment. "You've got talent," she'd said. I should have known better. I stormed downstairs, sketchbook in hand. Randall sat in his recliner, flipping through channels with the same disinterest he always wore like a second skin. "Did you see the post?" I asked. He didn't look up. "I don't get involved in Facebook drama." "She stole from me," I said. Sable took my sketchbook and twisted it into something ugly. "People are accusing me of witchcraft, for God's sake." Valora entered from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "If people think you've brought trouble here," she said, "maybe it's for a reason." I turned to her, fury vibrating just beneath the surface of my voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" She shrugged, unbothered. "You keep to yourself. You don't smile much. You wear those scarves. People talk." Randall said nothing. He never did. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. Back in my room, I sat at my desk, staring at the spot where my sketchbook usually lived. The space felt hollow now, like something sacred had been violated. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't petty jealousy. This was a plan, coordinated, deliberate, cruel. I pulled out a notepad and scribbled 2 words in capital letters. Prove it. I didn't know how just yet, but I wasn't going to let them get away with this. It was barely light outside when I walked up the steps of Ashbury First Baptist Church. The cold bit at my fingers, but I wasn't sure if it was the temperature or what I suspected was waiting for me inside. The parking lot still held the dewy stillness of early morning, but there were voices echoing from the foyer. I knew I should have waited until later in the day, when fewer people were around, but something in my chest told me to go now. Face it head on. Inside, the smell of floor polish and paper bulletins hit me like it always did. Familiar, almost comforting. I nodded politely to Mrs. Dawson, who was arranging coffee cups in the fellowship corner, and walked straight to the corkboard where they pinned the weekly announcements. The flyer was there. Founders Day Festival, opening ceremony, reading. Sable Griggs. Not my name. Hers. Same time, same place. Same poem I had practiced since February. My breath caught, but I didn't let it sit too long. I scanned the rest of the list. My name wasn't anywhere. Not on the volunteer schedule, not on the sign-up sheet for table setup, not even on the baker's needed notice. They hadn't just replaced me, they had scrubbed me clean off the program like I was never part of it to begin with. As I stood there, motionless, I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned to find Mr. Kavanaugh, an elder, someone I'd known since I was a child, glancing at the bulletin with an awkward tilt of his head. "Maybe it's for the best, Gemma," he muttered, eyes not quite meeting mine. "Things are tense enough." I wanted to ask him what that meant exactly. Tense for who? But instead I just nodded slightly, as if that made sense, and walked out before my face gave me away. By the time I got to Main Street, the stores had opened, and the town was already buzzing with festival preparation. Banners stretched from one side of the street to the other. Children were painting wooden signs. The bakery had put up frosted cookies in the shape of Ashbury's bell tower. I tried to walk past it all, pretend I wasn't unraveling. But then I saw the poster taped to the florist's window. Valora's window. It was a glossy photo of Sable, smiling in a soft yellow dress, holding a leather-bound poetry book I recognized as mine. The caption read, "Join Ashbury's own Sable Griggs as she opens this year's Founders' Day with a heartfelt reading honoring our town's spirit." My knees almost buckled. I stepped back, head spinning, watching as Valora appeared behind the glass, arranging tulips. She looked up, saw me, and gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging an agreed-upon outcome. It was never about the poem. It was about taking my place, piece by piece. I walked without a destination for a while, just up and down side streets, trying to breathe through the ache in my chest. Eventually, my feet carried me to Ioni's house, the one person left in this town who still called me dear without bitterness in her voice. She opened the door with a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look tired," she said gently, motioning me inside. I sat down at her kitchen table while she poured tea, chamomile same as always, and set out a dish of ginger snaps she'd probably baked the night before. We chatted, or tried to. I asked about her garden. She asked about my hours at the library. But every time I brought up the festival, or even mentioned the church, her expression would falter. She'd change the subject, or refill my cup. Finally, I said it plainly. "Did Valora come see you?" Her silence was answer enough. When she did speak, her voice was so quiet I barely caught it. "She stopped by last night." I set my cup down. "And?" "She didn't threaten me. Not directly." Ioni's hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. "But she mentioned old stories, things from my nursing days, accusations that were never true but never quite went away either." I stared at her. "She blackmailed you." "She gave me a choice," Ione said, eyes glistening. "She said it would be better for everyone if I kept some distance for a while." My throat tightened. "And you agreed?" Her lips pressed into a line. "I'm sorry, Gemma. I truly am. But I can't afford to lose what little I have left in this town." I stood, not out of anger, but to keep from crying in front of her. Ione didn't look away. "I hope you understand," she whispered. I did. I didn't like it. But I understood. People in this town weren't brave. They were self-preserving. Valora didn't need to shout to control them, just whisper in the right ears. I left her house around midday. The sun was out now, but it didn't warm me much. On the way home, I passed familiar faces. Some looked through me. Others offered thin, artificial smiles, the kind people give to strangers who make them uncomfortable. When I walked past the florists again, Valora was standing outside with a clipboard, organizing deliveries for the festival. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a floral print apron. She laughed at something one of the teens said. As I passed, she didn't acknowledge me. She didn't have to. She had already erased me. I got home, made myself a sandwich I didn't finish, and went upstairs. My room was the only place in the house that still felt like mine. Barely. That night, I sat at the window, lights dimmed, watching strings of bulbs being tested across the festival grounds in the park down the road. People were already setting up tents, checking audio equipment. I watched them walk back and forth like they were building a celebration on top of my body. They'd stripped me of my voice, my space, my connections, and now they were pretending I never existed at all. But if Valora thought this was done, if she thought I'd slink away quietly, she was wrong. "They think they can erase me," I whispered to the dark outside. "Let's see how that goes." Monday morning rolled in under a veil of quiet dread. It should have felt like any other week in Ashbury. Kids heading off to school with their lunchboxes swinging, folks lining up for coffee at Donna's Diner, a few early risers already prepping booths for the upcoming Founders' Day festival. But beneath it all, I sensed the shift, the kind you don't see but feel in your bones. My name had been on too many lips for too many days, and I knew something was coming. I was at the community center helping set up for the craft fair. I'd signed up months ago, before everything started spiraling. It was one of the few responsibilities they hadn't formally kicked me off of. Yet, I figured if I kept my head down and focused on the task, I might remind people I still belonged here, that I wasn't some ghost wandering the streets. I was unpacking yarn bundles at the far end of the hall when I heard my name spoken loud enough to crack through the hum of conversation. Gemma! I turned. Mrs. Fuller was storming toward me, her face flushed, one hand clutching her purse like a weapon. Her other arm held tightly onto her son's shoulder. Eli, maybe 8 or 9, looking pale and confused. "You touched my boy at church yesterday, didn't you?" she demanded. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "Someone saw you patting his head after the service, and now he's running a fever and can't hold down his breakfast." I looked at Eli, who didn't meet my eyes, just stared down at the floor. "I handed him a bulletin," I said evenly. "That's all." "Then why would someone say they saw you whispering something over him?" "Something strange?" I felt a chill at the back of my neck. "I didn't whisper anything. I said, 'Have a good week,' same as I do with all the kids." Her voice rose. "You think this is funny? You think playing innocent will change what's happening in this town?" Other heads were turning now. Crafters, vendors, even Pastor Walker, who'd just arrived and was still sipping from his travel mug. They weren't approaching, but they were watching. Mrs. Fuller pointed at me. "This is what happens when you let evil walk around unchecked. My boy's sick because you brought something into that church." "That's enough," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're scared, and I get it, but pointing fingers without proof." "She's right." That voice, soft, sugary, and venom-laced, cut through the crowd like a blade. Sable stepped forward from the far side of the room, arms crossed, phone in hand, like she'd been filming or getting ready to. "Gemma's been drawing strange things. Everyone's seen it. And she was near the boy. Coincidence?" People started murmuring. "She was at the tree before the crops went bad." "She's always off in her own world." "Didn't she have some weird journal or something?" I stood frozen, watching the whispers turn into a swarm. And then, just when I thought it couldn't sting worse, Randall walked through the door. He paused when he saw the scene, me standing alone in the middle of an increasingly hostile circle. He didn't look surprised. He never looked surprised anymore. Someone asked him, "Is this your daughter?" He hesitated. For the smallest moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd stand up for me. But then he said, "I don't know what she's been up to, but let me be clear. I'm not involved in any of this." It hit me harder than I expected. Not the words exactly, but the way he said them. As if he were stepping back from a stranger at a crime scene, my own father. The crowd didn't explode. They didn't need to. The damage was already done. His silence before was bad enough. But this? This was erasure wrapped in false neutrality. Behind him, Valora stood near the doorway, arms folded, face calm as stone. And next to her, of course, Sable raised her phone and hit record. I caught just enough of the screen to see it was already live. I looked back at Randall, searching for any sign of regret. There was none. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. Instead, I walked. Right past Mrs. Fuller, past the pastor, past the dozens of eyes following me like I was something crawling across the floor. As I stepped outside into the warm morning air, I felt like I was watching my life collapse from the outside. The sky was clear, birds chirped, the festival banners fluttered with cheer, and inside, a room full of people had just decided I wasn't one of them anymore. I walked the long way home, through Maple Street and past the park. It gave me time to think, to feel, and to plan. By the time I reached my front steps, my body felt heavy, but my mind was strangely sharp. I opened the door, dropped my bag, and stood there for a minute, looking around the living room. The floral couch Valora picked out, the wooden frames Randall insisted on keeping, the fake houseplants Sable used for her video backgrounds. None of it felt like home. None of it ever did. I made myself a cup of tea, didn't drink it. I sat in my room, didn't move for a while. My hands clenched and unclenched without my noticing. And then, finally, I heard myself think something I hadn't allowed before. If they've already painted me as the villain, maybe it's time I stop acting like the saint. After that Monday at the community center, I didn't speak to anyone in the house for 2 full days. Not Valora, not Sable, and not Randall. I moved like a ghost, in and out of rooms, keeping my back straight, my eyes forward. They didn't seem to mind. Valora whistled when she cooked. Sable filmed one of her day-in-the-life videos on the porch, pretending she was the perfect small-town daughter. And Randall, he did what he did best. He sat in his chair, nodded along with the news, and said nothing. Wednesday night arrived like an unwanted letter in the mail, heavy and final. I was in my room, the one place in that house still untouched by their hands. A single lamp lit the corner of my desk, casting a soft glow on the objects that still connected me to something pure. There weren't many left. On my lap was my mother's scarf. Cream-colored with delicate green stitching along the edges, it smelled faintly of lavender, even after all these years. It was the only thing I had from her that hadn't been boxed away or thrown out. I held it like it might vanish if I blinked too long. I could still picture the morning she gave it to me. 5th grade, first day back after summer break. She'd wrapped it around my shoulders as I sulked about my new haircut. "This will keep you warm and safe," she'd said, "and remind you that you're always more than what people see." I pressed it to my chest and let the memory sit there for a minute longer, like holding on to the last note of a song you don't want to end. That was when I smelled the smoke. Not the kind from dinner gone wrong or a candle left too long. No, this was sharp, biting, and wrong. I stood up, folded the scarf carefully, and walked to the hallway. The scent grew stronger as I passed Randall's closed door and stepped onto the back porch. Outside, the night was cool but still. I saw the flicker before I saw her. Valora stood by the fire pit with her arms crossed, staring into the flames like they had something important to say. I stepped closer, the porch wood creaking beneath me. Then I saw it, the corner of cream-colored fabric in her hand, green thread curling up at the edges from heat. "Don't," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut air. She turned slowly. Her expression didn't shift, not guilt, not surprise. "You're up," she said plainly, and with a final flick of her wrist, she dropped the scarf into the fire. I ran forward, almost slipping on the dewy grass, and watched it curl and blacken in the flames. My hands shook, not with panic, with fury. "What is wrong with you?" I choked out. Valora didn't answer right away. She picked up the fire poker and nudged the fabric deeper into the embers like it was just a scrap of paper that didn't matter. "You need to stop clinging to the past," she finally said. "This is my house now. My family." I stared at her. Not the way you stare at a person. The way you look at something decaying and still pretending it's alive. "I should have burned it a long time ago," she added. "That woman, your mother, she left behind more mess than memories." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Behind me, I heard the door open. Randall stepped out, rubbing the back of his neck like the whole thing was just an unfortunate inconvenience. "She burned Mom's scarf," I said to him. My voice cracked. "She took the one thing I had left." He looked at the fire, then at me, then at her, and he sighed. "Gemma, I have to look out for my daughter." I blinked. "What?" He didn't say it again. He didn't need to. In that moment, I saw it clearly. He didn't see me as his daughter anymore. Maybe he hadn't for years. Sable was easier, louder. She smiled more. She didn't ask for space to grieve. Didn't flinch when Valora took over every inch of the house that used to hold my mother's laughter. I looked between them, my stepmother who destroyed what wasn't hers, and the man who let her. "You always said this was my home," I said quietly. "That no matter what, it would be mine." Randall swallowed hard. "Things change." A slow breath left my chest, not from exhaustion, but clarity. I took one step forward, enough for the firelight to catch my face. "If either of you try to erase me again," I said, voice low and steady, "you'll regret it." Valora raised an eyebrow like she'd heard a joke she didn't quite get. Randall looked at his feet, and I turned and walked away, back into the house, up the stairs, into my room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I sat down at my desk and stared at the burned gap on my bookshelf where the scarf used to rest. I opened my drawer, pulled out a notebook, and wrote one sentence across the top of a fresh page. "They've taken enough." And I underlined it twice. I woke to golden stripes of sunlight cutting through the blinds, painting bars across the walls like I was somewhere between a bedroom and a cell. Somewhere outside, I heard the distant slam of a car door. For a moment, I thought I'd overslept. My alarm hadn't gone off. I rubbed my temples, blinking off the last threads of sleep as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My body still ached from restless tossing. A dull unease settled over my chest. I padded across the room and reached for the doorknob, intending to head to the bathroom, maybe grab some water, normal things that shouldn't require second thoughts. The knob didn't turn. I blinked, tightened my hand, and twisted again. Harder. Still nothing. The door wasn't stuck. It was locked, from the outside. My heart gave a panicked flutter. I knocked once, then twice. Hello? My voice was cautious, unsure, still hoping this was some kind of mistake. Silence. I pressed my ear to the wood, breath shallow. Below, I could hear the muffled shuffle of movement, laughter, Sable's sugary, performative laugh, followed by Valora's clipped voice issuing instructions like she was orchestrating a campaign. Zippers, shuffling, the familiar thunk of the front door closing. Then, tires rolling across gravel. Then, nothing. I ran to the window and yanked open the blinds just in time to see the family car pulling out of the driveway. In the back seat, poised and perfect, sat Sable. Her hair had been curled into soft waves. Her lips were glossed. She wore the pale blue dress I had ironed and laid out the night before. My dress. The one I planned to wear on stage today. And in her lap, she held a stack of white paper. My speech. They didn't even bother pretending anymore. I stood motionless, the truth hitting me, not like a slap, but like a slow flood, each detail sinking in deeper. Today was the Ashbury Heritage Festival, the culmination of months of planning, community meetings, drafts, and rewrites. I'd poured myself into that speech. Each word was meant to be mine, a reflection of my voice, my heart, my roots in this town. And now, they were going without me, wearing my clothes, speaking my words, stealing my place. My breath came shallow, and my hands trembled. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet and surgical, precise, like they'd planned this, like locking me in was just another part of the script. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed and reached for my phone on the desk. It was still charging. I unlocked it and opened the Ashbury Connect Facebook page, the town's lifeline for events and live updates. The live stream had already started. The stage was everything I had helped design. Soft yellow bunting, wild sunflowers in mason jars, and wooden chairs arranged under strings of white lights swaying in the breeze. It was the perfect vision of Southern charm, the kind that made people nostalgic for a version of history they never lived. And there, in the center, stood Sable, grinning. Her posture relaxed, confident. She adjusted the microphone with the ease of someone born into entitlement. And then she spoke. The words were mine, word for word. She even mimicked my pauses, my inflections. I could almost hear where I'd scribbled out alternatives in my journal, crafting every sentence like a melody. The audience nodded along. Some clapped. The pastor shook her hand with pride. Someone handed her a bouquet, and the mayor leaned in for a photo. And I, locked in my bedroom, sat holding a phone, invisible. I set the phone down gently, like if I moved too fast, the truth would shatter. I stood in the middle of the room, breathing slow and shallow, trying to stop the hot prickle at the back of my eyes. I had two choices. I could sit and cry, or I could get out. I crossed to the closet and dropped to my knees. Months ago, I had stored a small toolkit there after replacing a warped window hinge. I didn't think I'd need it again, but now, it felt like an anchor. I rummaged past storage boxes and found the red metal case. My fingers were clumsy, unsteady, but I pried it open and pulled out a flathead screwdriver. I went to work on the door. The screws were stubborn. My shoulders ached from the angle. I had to pause a few times to catch my breath, to stretch my wrist, to steady my hands. But I didn't give up. I didn't yell for help. I didn't cry. I worked. And when the last screw clinked to the floor and the door eased open, I felt something rise inside me. Not rage, not even relief. Power. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to be rescued. I had solved it myself. The hallway beyond was silent, echoing, hollow. I walked slowly down the stairs, letting my feet land with quiet deliberation. I took in the stillness. The smell of Valora's citrus cleaner still lingered in the air. The pristine living room was untouched, centerpiece precisely aligned, coasters stacked, no sign of the chaos they'd left behind. Sable's tote bag sat on the couch like an afterthought. Randall's favorite mug, half full of coffee, sat on the side table, cooling without an owner. I could have stormed to the festival. I could have marched up to the stage and told everyone the truth. I had every right to, but I didn't. Instead, I walked back to my desk, sat down, took a slow breath, and pulled out a fresh notebook. I opened it to the first page, and in bold, steady letters, I wrote, "They just turned this into a fight they can't win." I underlined it. Twice. This wasn't just about a stolen speech or a locked door. This was about something deeper, the slow, deliberate erasure of a person's voice, the kind of cruelty that hides behind manners and smiles and lace curtains. I had spent too long excusing it, too long trying to make peace, too long hoping that being quiet, being kind, being cooperative would earn me a seat at the table. But today, they slammed the door behind them and locked it. So now I would do what they never expected. I would tell the truth, piece by piece, date by date. I began writing. Every slight, every time my contributions were passed off, every meeting where my ideas were echoed louder by someone else's voice. I wrote down the dress, the speech, the keys I'd once had to the office that mysteriously stopped working. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing this because I deserved to exist in full view. They wanted me silent. They wanted me erased. They had no idea who they were dealing with. By Monday morning, I'd already started building my case. I didn't make a speech. I didn't call anyone out. I did what my mother used to do when the world got too loud, pulled inward and got to work. Quietly, precisely. Thalia and I met in the back corner of the Ashbury Public Library, where the Wi-Fi was strongest and the windows faced the alley, not the street. Less chance of someone peeking in or accidentally listening too close. She brought her laptop, I brought a box of old paperwork I'd kept tucked away in a trunk, and together we started organizing the mess into something sharp. "Your name is still listed on the original property transfer," Talia said, eyes skimming through the scanned deed. "It doesn't say full ownership, but your mother's signature shows clear intent to preserve your stake." I nodded, jotting notes as she spoke. That mattered, not just emotionally, but legally. We backed up screenshots of the original email I'd sent to Sable with my speech draft, proof of authorship. I highlighted witness statements from two of my regulars at the library who remembered me reading those exact lines out loud during practice. Everything had to be verifiable. I wasn't going to hand Valora or Sable any room to say I was making things up or being emotional, like they always claimed when they ran out of excuses. By the time the lunch hour passed, we'd filled a USB drive and most of a notebook. It was the closest thing I'd felt to control in weeks. That night, I stayed up late formatting everything, labeling files, setting folders in order. It felt a little ridiculous at times, like I was preparing for trial when all I wanted was my life back. But I knew better now. In Ashbury, perception was power, and for too long, Valora had controlled both. Then came the pushback. It started with a Facebook post, simple, short, and dripping with condescension. Some of us are trying to stay positive despite the negativity others are spreading. Mental health is serious, y'all. Pray for those struggling to see themselves clearly. Signed, Valora Griggs. Not directly naming me, of course. That would have required honesty. But everyone knew who she meant. The comments came fast. "You're so strong, Valora. Some people just can't handle seeing others succeed. Been praying for peace in your household." Sable chimed in an hour later with a post of her own, a close-up of her holding a candle and the words, "Lifting someone I love through prayer, not naming names, just trusting God." I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly gave myself a headache. But it worked. That's what stung most. The message wasn't just reaching their friends. It was bleeding into the church group chats, the PTA circles, the silent spaces where people whispered and rarely checked facts. I knew I couldn't outpost them, so I stuck to my plan. Tuesday afternoon, I overheard Randall on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping. He wasn't exactly being quiet. Yeah, he was saying. She's going through something, I think. Valora wouldn't post something like that without a reason. I stood in the hallway, out of sight but close enough to feel the weight of every word. She's been distant, upset about things that happened years ago. It's hard to reason with someone who won't let go. It took everything in me not to walk in there and scream, but I didn't. I waited until he hung up, then went outside to sit on the steps and let the cool air pull the heat from my skin. I didn't cry. I was done crying over Randall, over the man who used to tuck my scarf into my coat when I was a little girl, over the man who, apparently, decided I was too much work to defend. By Wednesday, the smear campaign had picked up steam. Someone anonymously submitted a story to the town newsletter, talking about a concerning figure in the community who had been caught trespassing, drawing occult symbols, and displaying increasingly erratic behavior. There was no name attached, just sources say, but the quotes sounded awfully familiar. Thalia sent me a photo of the print copy, circled in red ink. "Want me to write something back?" she texted. "No," I replied. "Let them talk. I'm almost ready." We spent the next few days tightening the record. I called in a favor from a local librarian who remembered when Valora first moved into town, and how she never once volunteered for a community event until my mother passed. Thalia found a blurry photo of a whiteboard I'd used for planning my reading draft, dated a week before Sable ever asked to help. We pieced it all together like a puzzle, and when it was done, I looked at it and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, solid. That night, I sat at my desk in the dark, the glow of my screen casting light over the USB drive in front of me. "They wanted to play in public," I whispered. "Let's see how they handle the truth in public." The invitation to speak at the town council came in the most unexpected way, through a polite email from the clerk's office, buried between junk mail and utility reminders. It simply said, "Agenda addition approved. You've been allotted 5 minutes for property clarification. Please bring documentation." 5 minutes. After months of being erased, misquoted, locked out, and lied about, I was being given 5 minutes to set everything straight. That would have felt like an insult once, but not now. I printed everything, organized files, created duplicates, and tucked the USB drive into my purse like it was holding the weight of justice itself. Thalia double-checked every folder, every page. Arthur Linton, my mother's old attorney, confirmed he'd meet me there at 6:15 sharp. The Ashbury Town Hall was buzzing when I arrived that evening. Parking was tighter than usual. People lingered outside in clusters, sipping sweet tea, leaning on pickup trucks, speculating about budgets and festival bills. The Founders' Day wrap-up meeting was always crowded, but the air tonight held a different kind of tension, like something was about to break loose, and no one knew quite what. I walked up the steps, head high, every pair of eyes tracking me like I was a stranger in my own town. I spotted Valora and Sable inside, sitting confidently near the front. Randall was with them, slouched in his usual way, looking bored, like he had been dragged along. I took my seat in the back, near the windows, 2 rows behind the podium. The first 20 minutes dragged. Committee reports, funding disputes, some back and forth about pothole repairs on Chapel Street. I barely heard a word. My hands stayed folded, my pulse a steady throb in my ears. Then the clerk called my name. "Miss Gemma Monroe, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours." I stood, papers in hand. The room quieted fast. Even Valora stopped tapping her pen. "I'm here to speak about the Monroe property," I said clearly. "Specifically, the rightful ownership." Before anyone could interrupt, the rear doors creaked open. Arthur Linton entered, dressed in his usual blazer, holding a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. He nodded at me, then stepped forward and handed a thick folder to the council clerk. "This pertains to the original will and deed of transfer," Arthur announced. "Filed in 1999, signed by Margaret Monroe, prior to her marriage to Randall Pike." You could hear the oxygen leave the room. Arthur continued without missing a beat. "The will names her daughter, Gemma Monroe, as the sole inheritor of the property located at 48 Mill Creek Road. No amendments were ever filed. No contestation was made at the time of death. This document was legally binding then and remains so now. Valora sat up straighter. Sable blinked. Randall leaned forward like maybe, for once, he realized something wasn't going to go his way. The council members flipped through the pages, murmuring. The clerk scanned and projected the deed onto the overhead screen. There it was, my mother's handwriting, clear and looped, my name spelled out in full. I've also filed for immediate legal enforcement, Arthur said, pulling out another document. Per court order, eviction notices have been issued to Mrs. Valora Griggs, Miss Sable Griggs, and Mr. Randall Pike. They have 72 hours to vacate the premises. That was it. Clean, direct, legal. Valora opened her mouth, but the council chair shut it for her. This isn't a debate, ma'am. The order stands. Sable looked like she wanted to vanish. Randall turned red. Not angry red, but something worse. Embarrassed. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just stood a little taller. I turned to them, calm and steady, and said, You spent months trying to erase me from my own life. It's over. And with that, I picked up my purse, nodded to Arthur, and walked out of the room. I didn't wait for reactions. I didn't need them. Outside, the air was crisp and open. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without feeling like I owed anyone an apology. I walked slowly toward my car, letting the weight of it settle. Not revenge, not even justice, just restoration. The past few months had been a storm, but in that moment, with my mother's name legally tethered back to mine, I felt something anchor inside me again. By the end of the week, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The front door clicked shut behind me one final time that week, and for the first time in years, no one was coming through it after me. No muffled footsteps upstairs. No passive-aggressive questions from the kitchen. No manufactured laughter echoing down the hallway. Just me. And silence. The house was mine now. Legally. Fully. Every inch of hardwood, every creaky stair, every spot where dust had settled untouched for too long. But as I stood in the living room that Friday afternoon, with nothing left of them except a faint trace of Valora's perfume lingering in the curtains, the stillness wrapped around me like something I didn't quite trust yet. I walked slowly from room to room, letting my fingers graze the walls like I was meeting them for the first time. The dining table, once host to dinners where Randall barely looked at me, sat clean and quiet. Sable's makeup mirror had been stripped from the upstairs bathroom. Valora's framed photos were gone, the nails they hung on still embedded in the walls like ghosts who hadn't gotten the message to leave. I paused in the doorway of what used to be their bedroom. Empty. Just sunlight cutting across the floor where her jewelry box once sat. I wasn't smiling. Not exactly. But my jaw wasn't clenched either. That evening, I stopped by the library to check the returns. Routine. Grounding. On the way out, two regulars, Mrs. Vaughn and Pete Langford, were whispering near the mystery section. When they saw me, they stiffened a bit, but Mrs. Vaughn leaned in and said, Well, I guess she finally got what was coming. Pete nodded. Did you hear the flower shop shut down? Whole communities turned cold on her. I didn't say much, just offered a polite smile and kept walking, but inside, I filed it away. Not with glee, not as some triumph to save her, just confirmation. Valora had spent years building a name on half-truths and charm. But the foundation cracked fast once people saw through it. Later that weekend, Thalia texted me a screenshot. Sable's influencer account had been flagged for plagiarism after someone submitted my original speech to the hosting platform. Sponsorships gone. Follower count plummeting. Her brand unraveling in real time. Randall, I heard through Ione, had moved into a rental on the far end of town. One of those one-bedroom apartments above a hardware store. Word was, he hadn't shown up for breakfast at the diner all week. Folks stopped sitting with him anyway. The fallout happened fast, but none of it brought back what they took. Monday morning, Ione came by. She held a small potted fern in her arms and wore that look I'd always associated with good intentions wrapped in quiet regret. I should have done more, she said as I opened the door. You kept my mother's will safe, I told her, stepping aside to let her in. That was enough. We sat on the porch with tea, the breeze just light enough to rustle the old wind chimes. She didn't talk much, neither did I. Some silences aren't heavy, they're healing. And I'd missed that kind. As dusk settled, she squeezed my hand gently and said, "You did right, Gemma. Your mama would be proud." That night, I walked back inside alone and went straight to the study. Where the scarf used to be, I had placed a framed photograph of me and Mom from my high school graduation. She looked proud, hands on my shoulders, chin tilted like she knew I'd make it through something bigger than either of us could have imagined back then. I opened my journal and wrote, "Winning doesn't erase what they took, but it stops them from taking more." I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. They weren't poetic, they didn't need to be, they were true. I made a decision right then. This house wouldn't just be a victory monument or a museum to grief. It would be a haven, a place for anyone who ever felt unseen, unheard, unwanted. I wasn't the only one in this town who'd been quietly erased. I just happened to fight louder. Before I went to bed, I walked through the house one more time. Not because I was checking for them, but because it was mine now. I turned off the hallway lights, one by one, and stood in the kitchen doorway with my hand resting on the old oak trim. "This is mine now," I whispered. And for the first time in months, the house didn't push back. I locked the front door, set the alarm, and climbed the stairs with no fear of what I might hear or who I might bump into. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with trumpets or fireworks. It came like a soft exhale, in a house finally still. Because in Ashbury, nothing stays quiet forever. Sometimes, the people who try the hardest to silence you are the ones most afraid of what your truth will reveal. This story isn't just about betrayal or revenge, it's about reclaiming your voice when everyone around you tries to take it. What would you do if your own family turned against you? Would you stay silent or fight back? Let me know in the comments, and if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw, and unforgettable stories like this one.